right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my first podcast lesson that I'm going to be making, and it's going to be about coming up with a name and logo, and then also being able to create your Spotify account that you can load your podcast to. So first, let's talk about coming up with a name and logo. First off, I think you should try to come up with something that's catchy, and then I think you should come up with a logo that well represents what your podcast is going to be about, whether it be you, whether it be a group of people, whether it be the topic that you're going to tackle in your podcast. That's what I think you should start with. So for me, I started a podcast. It's called Now Airing. I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. This is my podcast. Basically what I do is I interview people that are local, that have done interesting things. I like to interview bands, talk about the music that they make, and then I like to talk about sports as well. So that's basically what I do. My podcast is called Now Airing. It's a play off my last name, obviously. And then my picture there is a picture of me with a headset on. And my signature thing that I do with Barely Covered is I always wear eye black, and kind of an ode to both the fact that I like 80s music, and they wore makeup and crazy face paint and things like that, and then I also like coaching baseball, where they actually wear eye black. So, and then I have my hat on there. So you might wonder, where did I get this picture from? Where did this come from? Well, the first thing you need to know about me is I cannot draw to save my life. So I can tell you right now that I did not make that image. I actually paid somebody on Fiverr, and if you've never heard of Fiverr before, it's literally a website. You can get it on your phone as well. It's an app. Fiverr is spelled Fiverr.com, and basically what I did is I got on Fiverr and I just looked for a caricature artist, somebody that could draw me as like a cartoon character. And literally, when you do something like this, I think I used maybe something like this. I don't know. You can start. They start as like cheap as like $10, but you contact the person and you say, hey, here's a picture of me. This is kind of what I had in mind. This is what I'm going for. Can you make this image of me? And then they get back to you, and it usually takes a few days. But if you don't want to spend money on it and you want to come up with your own, maybe you are artistic, or maybe you have an artistic friend that you don't mind asking, or maybe you want to design it on the computer. Completely up to you. I'm just giving you this option because, like I said, I was the type of person, I am not artistic like that. I can't draw. I'm not really into creating, a logo on a computer. It's just not what I want to do. So if you are interested in using a service like this, you can, but obviously there's a fee that's associated with it. So if you don't want to pay a fee, then totally understand that as well. Okay, now, talked about the name. Name needs to be something catchy, represent your podcast. Talked about your image, because this is really what it's going to look like when you go to your, podcast page on Spotify, or if we make them for YouTube, we'll upload them to the TV Studio YouTube account. You'll get to come up with a thumbnail, and that thumbnail will be consistent with your podcast every time. So I think that's important. But let's talk about the next thing. How the heck do you get your podcast on Spotify? It's actually super, super easy. If you just go to Google and you search Spotify for podcasters, so if I just type in Spotify for podcasters, the first thing that pops up here is this. So click on this, and it actually doesn't cost anything to put your podcast on Spotify. So if you're going to sign up, you just go to the sign up button, and then you say, I want to start a podcast, because you don't have one yet. I want to start a podcast. And then this is the part where you're going to have to continue with an email address. And then it's going to prompt you and ask you a bunch of basic questions, which I'm not going to go through in this because, well, I've already got a podcast and I already have done this. So I'm not going to create a video that's showing you that. But this is basically how you go about it. Now, what I will do is I will show you what my podcast looks like whenever I log in. So I'm going to pause for a second and log in. All right, well, good thing I paused it, because my Spotify Wrapped for the year showed up right away, and it took quite a while for me to click through that. But anyways, once you log in, this is what it looks like. All you have to do to add a new episode is literally just click New Episode, and then it's literally just drop a file here. So you could select a file from your computer, obviously. Now, if it's a video file, you can upload video podcasts to Spotify as well. You can watch a video podcast on Spotify. Joe Rogan's is like that. My favorite podcast, Armchair Expert, is not a video podcast, which is why I went the audio podcast route. I don't think anybody wants to spend, an hour looking at me talking, so I think it makes sense to have mine as being an audio podcast. So I enjoy it that way. It's also less editing for me to do, and then people can listen to it in their cars and things like that. But literally, this is all you have to do once you log in and you create an episode. So I'll do an episode. I'll do an episode on, or a lesson on, creating an episode, so you guys know. It's got pretty cool analytics once you get in here, so it's kind of cool to see how many times people have played your episode and things like that. As you can see, this is my episode listing here. I think my most popular podcast per my Wrapped was my Cullen Van Leer podcast. I had him on and we talked. It had 201 plays, which my podcasts are pretty long. I think that's probably like a 2-hour podcast. The median play time, so it means the middle amount of people listen to it for at least an hour and 40 minutes. So the people that listen to it at least stuck around for a long time, which is pretty cool. And then the only other thing I'll show you here, kind of cool to see. I won't show you the whole Wrapped. I'll pause it for just a second till I get to the end. All right, so kind of interesting if you've ever wondered what Spotify Wrapped looks like for a podcast channel. My podcast last year, I guess I created 2.9 thousand minutes of podcasting with all 32 of my podcasts together. And then I thought this was kind of interesting. 251 people, my podcast was their top podcast. For 379, I was in their top 5, and then for 409, I was in their top 10. Honestly, those numbers are kind of surprising me because I didn't know that many people listened. But kind of interesting, kind of different to see. Then my top podcast of the year was obviously, like I showed you earlier, was the one with Coach Van Leer. So this should have showed you a little bit of ideas on how to come up with a name, a logo. So you're going to need those two things for sure when you make an account, and then how to go to Spotify for podcasters and sign up for your account. The interesting thing is Spotify for podcasters is free, so you could freely put podcasts out there. But to put music, it costs money for Barely Covered to put their music on Spotify. We have to pay a fee, like a hosting fee, to be able to do that. So it's cool that podcasts are free, though. So check out the next video for the next lesson.